Hi, I'm Lisa Culhane, and I'm here tonight to talk about diversity. I have a connection to East that goes way back. My mom graduated here in 1957. My husband graduated from East in 1985, and both my children graduated in East in 2016 and 2018. First question, have you ever obsessively checked your phone to see who responded to a post or a picture? Have you ever found yourself unconsciously picking your nose in a very public place? I love this group. See, it's safe. You can raise your hand. Have you ever done a little happy dance after a conversation? Have you ever said something mean about somebody to create connection with the person you were with? Have you ever waved back at somebody who wasn't actually waving at you? Have you ever felt like you didn't belong? Have you ever said something and then spent the entire rest of the day obsessing over what you said and willing yourself back in time so you could redo it? Have you ever sat smiling at your phone like a complete idiot while texting with somebody? Have you ever decided to not work out an issue with someone or pursue a friendship because it was just supposed to come naturally and be easier than this? Have you ever noticed that the things that come naturally are the exception rather than the rule? Thanks for participating in my little quiz. If you answered yes to any of these things, it means you're human. And as a human, we are hyper-relational beings who crave connection and hate to be embarrassed. And it's the juncture of these two places that gets in our way, even though we know we would like to live in have more diversity in our lives and live in a more diverse world that feels like we're really participating. I have a quick story for you. 10 years ago, our family spent a year traveling around the world. And while we were gone, my son got this, he was 9 at the time, he got this crazy rash on his hands. And we spent almost that entire year trying to solve this problem. And we first started with doctors and pharmacists in Europe. We then saw pharmacists in the Middle East. We saw pharmacists and doctors in Africa about this. And it was still plaguing us when we were in Asia. And we ended up walking into a pharmacy in Vietnam to see if we could try yet another solution. We walk through the door and the bell rings, and we wait. And pretty soon this very old woman shuffles out from a back room. She had maybe 3 teeth. And I have to tell you, if I was in Denver, Colorado, and I went to the pharmacist, and that's what they looked like, I would have balked. I would have been hesitant to take their advice, based solely on the way she looked. But I didn't have that choice because I was in Vietnam. So instead, I showed her my son's hands because we didn't have a word of Vietnamese and she didn't have a word of English. She looked at him, she studied him, and she shuffled back into that back room. And we waited, and we waited, and we waited, and eventually she shuffled back out. And she hands me a packet. And I open it and look in, and there's some powder in it. And I give her the universal sign of, what do I do with it? She shuffled back into that back room, came out again with a little bowl and some water, opened the packet, took a spoonful out, mixed it, had my son wash his hands in it, and let them dry naturally. We thanked her, paid her, and made our way out. She solved my son's problem. She was the first person to do so. And yet I had hesitated because of the way she looked. Why do we do this? What causes us to judge somebody based solely on appearance before we get to know them? Well, it ends up there's really three main reasons. The first one is our brains. You see, we are inundated with 11 million bits of information per second. Let me say that again. We are inundated with 11 million bits of information per second. We can unconsciously process about 10,000 of those, and we can consciously process about 40. What that means is that we are filtering machines. We are so good at filtering out information that we don't need to deal with. And this is absolutely awesome. It means that when I wake up in the morning and I turn and climb out of bed, I don't have to think, oh my gosh, is the floor going to support me? Are my feet going to support me? I've filtered out all that. I don't need to think about any of that. It's just natural. But it can get in our way when we're trying to do something different or change something from the past. And this is because we filter on our past history, and we filter based on our communities and what we've learned. And so those filters can get in our way when we're trying to change how we do something. The second reason is that we hate to be embarrassed. We hate the idea of saying something wrong, of offending, of possibly overstepping when we shouldn't have. So instead, we avoid. And the third thing that can get in our way is that we think this just comes naturally. It should be easy. We shouldn't have to make an effort. But you need to make a dedicated effort if what you want to do is change the makeup of your friend group or your classroom or your workspace or your community. So we took our filters out of the picture. Second, we were already always embarrassed. We were in situations and places that we never knew what was going on or what was happening. Sometimes we didn't know how to order dinner. Sometimes we didn't know how to use the bathroom. And we had to ask. And we embarrassed ourselves. And we perhaps even offended people. But what we found is that overall, people were so kind and helpful. And they wanted, when we made mistakes, they were willing to step in and help us. We purposely took ourselves out of our comfortable life in Denver to see what it was like to exist in this fabulous, big, diverse world. So then that begs the question, how do we do that when we're just here in Denver? And it ends up, for me, the answer came through a tool that I use in my coaching practice called the 36 questions. Now, these questions were founded in 1995, and they are designed to gradually guide you into a place of human connection. So they start with things that are pretty easy to talk about, and they slowly move you to more personal items. And these 36 questions, perhaps you've heard of them, they sometimes are called the 36 questions that lead to love. And that's how they were initially founded and what they were used for. It was to be used with people who were maybe feeling disconnected to somebody important in their lives. Well, Rudy Mendoza-Denton, who is a professor at the University of California at Berkeley, and also the Dean of Diversity and Inclusion, had used these questions as they had been developed and thought to himself, I wonder if I could use these questions in a different way. I wonder if I could use these questions to develop cross-race friendships. And the reason he asked himself this question is because students were coming to him and they were saying, this is really important to us. Yet they were stumbling and they were having trouble creating those relationships. And when he talked to them and asked them why, one reason was always, well, I gave it a try and I talked about stuff that I'm interested in, but things just never clicked. Filter. They were filtering on how they had created relationships with people who were more like them in the past. The other reason they gave was they didn't want to be embarrassed. One of the things they said is that they didn't want to offend, and they didn't want to be the targets of prejudice or be labeled as prejudiced. So instead, they just avoided. And the third reason they gave was, this is just supposed to be easy and natural. You're supposed to make friends easily. You're not supposed to have to work at this. Ends up, the 36 questions were amazing addressing all of these issues. And the reason is because it's a set protocol. It's a series of questions that, again, were designed to bring you closer. They're designed to have you create more connection as you go through them. And these students started, he decided to have a study and see if this worked. That's how he started. That's how all professors and scientists start. He did the study. He brought these students together. At first, they said those first 12 questions, he divided them into sets of 3, were really embarrassing, and it was awkward asking them. But they were all in that same boat, so they did it. It took it out of their filter because the questions are already prescribed. They didn't have to think of them. And they wanted to make the effort because they knew how important these diverse relationships were in their lives. So what does that mean for East? It means that if diversity is important to the people here, there's a way to do it, a simple and fast way. These questions take 45 minutes. That's one class period. You could use them in classes that are already diverse, such as the intro civics class freshman year. You could use them, bring 2 classes together that meet at the same time, that might have different racial makeup. Bring them together. You could use them with sports teams. You could bring sports teams together. You could bring clubs together. Parenting groups could decide this was important and decide to come meet somebody and talk to them using this 36-question protocol for one evening. It would take an hour. And then we'd be modeling for our kids. Circling back to our quiz that we started with, we want connection, we crave it, and we don't want to be embarrassed. These 36 questions give us a way to get that connection that we crave and avoid the embarrassment.